Rolf, welcome to 10% Truth. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for hosting me. Good morning.
You're unique in several respects as a guest of mine on the channel, but probably the most important is that you are my first German guest. German in terms of your nationality, but also German in terms of the Air Force that you flew for. And today we're going to talk about a range of different things, predominantly focused on your time flying the F-104 Starfighter. You did also fly the Tornado, and I'll let you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about you in a minute. But just for the guests at home, we will, if Rolf enjoys this experience, we'll come back and we'll do a part 2 where Rolf will talk about the Tornado. But the focus today is going to be on the F-104 and his early days, his early career as a fast jet pilot. Now, with that brief introduction done, before we talk about flying, Rolf, I wanted to ask if you would talk a little bit about growing up in West Germany and how that sort of shaped your view of the world and your experiences. And I know that's not necessarily a flying related topic, but for me, as a child of the Cold War, so I grew up in the latter stages. I was born in 1975. I grew up in the latter stages of the Cold War when it fell in 1991. That was great, but I sort of experienced what it was like to live in that world. But I've never really talked to anybody who was from West Germany, and I just wanted to know what that experience was like, and in particular, what it meant to be West German, and whether or not you felt a kinship with East Germans. And you know, you've got West Germany divided into 3 sections, with the Brits and the Canadians and the Americans administratively running parts of them. What was it like?
Well, you're actually hitting one of my favorite life subjects, because this has overshadowed my entire youth and the rest of my career, actually, within the military, because I was born in 1954 in the British sector of Germany. So I was born in Lower Saxony, which is now an area between the Harz Mountains and the western region near the Netherlands. And I was the son of a German architect and a pharmacist. So we lived in the central part of Lower Saxony, which is not far from Hamburg, Hanover area. And I remember as a kid, of course, Germany still in ruins. One-legged people walking around, crippled from the war, poor people. But then, of course, at the same time, in the early 50s, a very strong economic development. So really great times for the young families. People are able to purchase a motorcycle or a car, building houses. So this was the basic background. So I grew up right inside in the middle of this uprise, and as I said, in the British sector, which means we had a British license plate, British Lower Saxony, BN. My dad drove a little car and he was going to work. And when I started school in 1960, Germany was still technically didn't have a wall, an iron curtain yet. Yes, it was separated. Yes, since 1949, we had both our constitutions and technically separate states, but it wasn't until 1961 when the wall, as we all know, was erected from Berlin and then on. So I was right in the middle of this when I was at 1st and 2nd grade, and the teachers were explaining to us, hey guys, unfortunately our country is about to be split up, and here look at these cut train lines and roads, and we could actually witness it because we were living only half an hour from the border. So our grade school teacher would take us to the wall, look at the fence, look at the fortifications, look at the East German soldiers erecting the barbed wire and so on, and then trying to catch a glimpse of the farmers, on the other side doing their little things. And it's really mysterious for me at the time. Now, later at high school, we had a lot of instruction about that. Of course, Cold War was a big subject. And we were learning that we were part of NATO, part of, the whole political system. And we were very interested about the other side. I was personally interested because I could watch East German television in black and white. They have a different system over there. They don't have the PAL system. They have the not the NTSC, the CCAM, like the French did. So from my grandmother's house, which was even closer to the fence, I could watch their television, which was totally different from ours. I mean, pure indoctrination, pure propaganda, and only positive information about the workers, you know, the agriculture industry and everything. And because they tried to put down everything that was on the west side and trying to, you know, shed a positive light on everything they did over there. And I noticed even as a kid, something wasn't right. And this couldn't be true. So I became more interested, and I was actually gathering as much information as I could, having sent them books from East German Propaganda Ministry under a West Berlin address. You could write them, and they would send you loads of interesting books about their culture and medical achievements and whatever, television and satellite dishes and everything. So I tried to get information from both sides as much as I could. So it was a very fascinating start for me. And all my life, you know, I went to school before the wall came up, and I was there when it came down. I did my first flights with Lufthansa later into East Germany when it was still East Germany. So yeah, it was very fascinating for me to this day.
Did you feel like there was a sort of commonality then between you and East Germans? I mean, you know, so one day you're sort of a single country, but administratively cut up by what would have been called the Allies during World War II. And the next day, effectively, you're a country divided physically by a barrier. Did that lead to then you feeling sympathy for the people stuck on the other side? And over time, did you feel disconnected from them? Did they evolve into a different type of German?
I would say both. Yes, of course. Initially, we had family over there. We had I had an auntie in Leipzig who would send us East German classical records and books, and we had also a few distant relatives in the Baltic area, which is now where the tourists are. Beautiful area by the beaches. And there was one auntie. They had a special regulation if you had some sort of illness or if you were handicapped, you could legally come into Western Germany as even before senior citizen age. Normally, the workers couldn't come over, but in a few instances they could. So this one auntie would come over, and she would tell me how it is over there, how her sons were doing in the East German army. One guy was working for their merchant shipping line, and he later disappeared. We never saw him again, never seen at all. He actually just disappeared, probably fled to Cuba or somewhere. And yes, so I think in the beginning, in the 40s and 50s, there were still a lot of family ties, people even working on the other side until 1959, 60, like working East Berlin, commuting to work from West Berlin. This was still possible. And some of my teachers had only fled East Germany in the early 60s, just before, you know, the wall was erected, via Friedrichshafen tram station in East Berlin. It was a perfect place to change from east to west, short notice, just change tracks and you were in West Germany. So later on, as you said, more restrictions were imposed, severe indoctrination, and also I think most people just try to live their little lives, adapt to the system. Say if you were constantly watched over there at school, if you were caught watching West German television, then you were put under pressure. Your parents were being questioned. If you were making too many negative remarks, you were not able to study certain subjects. If you were a part of a Christian church, you couldn't do this and that and so on. And we all know this. So I think eventually, after about 20, 30 years, we definitely had two different systems going and what they call peaceful cooperation. Mm-hmm. and coexistence, rather peaceful coexistence, their technical term, and yes, North and South Korea, basically.
So you're going to, I hope at some point in this process, you'll talk about your graduation ceremony, flying getting your wings in the US, flying the F-104, and the guests that you invited to that. But so I won't spoil that. I'll let you tell that story. But I'm curious to know then, how did it feel as a young man who was about to join, actually, and again, I said you were unique. One of the other reasons you're unique to this channel is because you were a sailor before you were a flyer, and presumably you'll talk about that too. But how did it feel as a young man about to join a military that was sort of NATO aligned? Were there, did you get a sense that you, as a West German, even though you weren't involved in the war, that there was any sort of condescension or sort of mistrust or looking down at you because you were German from any of the other NATO countries? And was there a weight of war on your shoulders as a young man? Did you feel like you had to distance yourself from that? Was it something you could be open about? So it sounds like you were fairly comfortable inviting some interesting guest to your graduation ceremony. But I was just curious about, was the shadow of the war still there?
Yes and no. I mean, I was a Navy guy's son. My father was a naval lieutenant in France. He was on a minesweeper that they had captured from France. So he was there untouched. He came back unhurt. And he was actually quite positive about his time in the Kriegsmarine. So I didn't hear much negative from his side. I did hear some from other people, of course, who lost relatives. I lost an uncle in the army over there. But generally, I think once we had joined NATO, I didn't personally sense any hostility or any, unfriendliness towards me as a German. I was, as a 14-year-old, I was once in France on exchange with some other family over there, even though they were not really NATO. No special problems. Once I joined the Navy, I immediately took up courses with the Royal Navy, and everything was in a great partnership. And I can only say we were treated like comrades, and it's been like this ever since. So I think once we joined the treaty, that was it. Germany paid a heavy price. The country was divided. It was highly demolished, and everybody started from scratch. And I think that was the main point. They had to learn the lesson, and we had pretty good instruction at school, so we knew what was going on, who was the bad guys and the good guys, and and we were thinking, of course, NATO was a good system. We trusted in it, and we also trusted in our new allies. And I sometimes come back to the subject because my first Naval Air Squadron was getting Royal Navy Seahawks. And they came from RAF Lossiemouth, which incidentally bombed the Tirpitz. So only years before. So this is within a time span of maybe 10, 20 years. That's nothing, looking back. Yeah. So, but I think, times change, and this is it. That's life, carry on and get with it, And
I noticed, so one thing I haven't said, but the reason I know the story about your graduation ceremony is because you've written a fantastic book about your time in the F-104, and I'll put a link into the description.
Thank you.
Is it called Mark II?
Yes, it is.
I use Kindle, and Kindle never shows you the front cover or any of the contents. It just takes you straight to the first page. So it's called Mark II, and I haven't finished it yet, but I'm really enjoying it. It's a great read so far. So just a final question then about sort of the East-West German thing before maybe we understand how it is you ended up flying F-104s. I suppose it's natural then, if you've got a country that is suddenly divided physically, that you have relations all over the country, and that you might have East German relations and it being a West German. But did that sort of thing impact security clearances or your eligibility to join the military then? I mean, if you've got an auntie in East Germany who you're in frequent contact with, does that arouse suspicion? Is that investigated, or is that seen as a non-issue?
No, it was an issue, and actually she was just distant enough so I could join. My dad and I had to fill out a lot of papers. Like, incidentally, the same guys, the same thing happened to the East German guys. If they had relatives on the west side, they would have to claim. But now with this relationship with our real, quite, second cousins, whatever, this was not an issue. It would have been a problem if, like, my brother would have been serving in their East German Air Force or something like that. But no, once you claimed it, once you honestly said, this is this, and they probably did some background check and ran some background checks on us anyway. So yes, but it did. It was actually definitely question what was going on in the background of your family. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so tell us, Rolf, you became a sailor first. Obviously, this is an aviation podcast, but tell us briefly then how it is you ended up being on board ships.
Well, I initially wanted to become a school teacher because my best subjects were music, French, and English. I said, okay, but there was a compulsory military service at the time, and I didn't want to be drafted. I didn't want to be an army grunt or, digging holes and doing stuff like that. So I said, okay, my dad was in the Navy, so let's try to get into the Navy. And they had a funny program, 4 years sign up as a junior officer program with a sail training ship, Goy Fock, and then finally posted on, in my case, a frigate, which is a pretty modern type. And I signed up for that. It was a 4-year training program, officers candidate training, some weapons training, some specialized training, limited skills, obviously for 4 years. And then I was supposed to get out and go to university. But in the meantime, I fell in love with a girl, and my heart was broken. And some guys picked me up to go parachute jumping in the Netherlands, to cheer me up. So this was how I got in touch with aviation. And I thought, hey, this guy in the Cessna, he's much cooler than the guys on my ship. So I ended up signing up for the German Navy Starfighter pilot program. So very ambitious, very courageous. I never thought I was going to make it. But somehow, they invited me to the psychological test. And in the beginning, I was only interested in flying submarine patrol aircraft, the Breguet Atlantic, these twin engine long range surveillance aircraft that were flying over the Baltic. I thought, that's cool, go to Lufthansa flying school, learn the trade, and then maybe eventually join the airline. But then while I was still on my ship, some starfighter pilot came on the bridge and said, "Oh, you must be crazy. Don't drive, slow planes, go for the fast jets. It's more fun. Go to the States, rattlesnakes and guns and everything." So I believed him. I was only 21. I believed him. I changed my mind. I changed the papers, and I now applied for fast jet training. And that's how I ended up in the Starfighter.
Had you, as a boy, had any thoughts about flying? I mean, was your first appreciation of that really when you were in that Cessna about to jump out of it?
Exactly. Yeah, that was it. Never built any model planes, had no idea about the planes, never even touched the plane before I was basically when I started screening program with the military.
So one thing I was curious about, and perhaps it's premature to talk about it now, but we'll sort of drive and determination. There's a point in your book where you talk about being on the gunnery range at Luke in the F-104 and guys getting bad scores and throwing the towel in and going and flying heavies instead. But did that sort of very nascent appreciation then, that very young appreciation for flying or new appreciation for flying, do you think that was in any way influential in then your persistence and your determination to make it through the course, the F-104 course? I think about people who have dreamed of this their whole lives, since they were 4, all they wanted to do is be a fighter pilot, and then thinking whether or not that can help carry them through difficult moments in the training pipeline, because we all know that those happen to everybody, regardless of how good they are, how talented they are. Did the fact that this was a nascent enthusiasm, do you think that affected your training or the way you approached it?
Yes, probably, because I was really ambitious. And once I was accepted to the program, I knew I had to work extra hard because I had no flying background. And, I was determined to do my very best. And the moment I started flying, I felt it was the right thing for me. I felt at home with the plane. I felt comfortable with the instructors, even though I made my mistakes and they gave me back grades every once in a while. But they were fair, and it was a very nice, up to today, I think aviation is a great environment where everybody gets a good chance and it's really fair. And so if you work hard and if you're lucky, of course, you need a good, everybody needs a good day for a check ride and be in good shape. But generally speaking, if you work hard enough, you have a fair chance. So I thought, go for it and do my very best. And that's how I treated it.
Yeah. So tell us about going to the States then. So you did your training at Luke Air Force Base, which was in Arizona. What was the preparation that you did up to that point? Had you done any academics in Germany before you got to the US?
Yeah, actually, we did 1 year of screening at Fürstenfeldbruck Air Base, which was a Nazi air base and then an American air base. It's just outside Munich. It's still there. This is where the Luftwaffe Officer School is located right now. And the air base, the flying part is closed, but we went there in 1976, flew a few hours, 25 hours on a light piston trainer with retractable gear, which is the Piaggio P149, Italian, produced under license in Germany. So we did a bit of flying there just to show that we can follow procedures and do some aerobatics, limited aerobatics, not gaining a real pilot's license at the time. Then we did academics with aerospace physiology, some English, pressure chamber, and some other stuff that you need in the before even starting the formal jet training. And then after a while, we were sent to Texas with the undergraduate pilot training, which is still going pretty much the same way at that time in northern Texas, Wichita Falls, which is about an hour and a half from Dallas. And then on the Red River near the Oklahoma border, this was a real big base with 18,000 people on it. And we were just a tiny part of flying enterprise with a German squadron flying T-37s, twin jets, little side-by-side jets, and then T-38 supersonic trainers. So we spent the first 13 months without interruption in the States, which was the first time in the United States for me at all. And then after a short vacation, once we passed that undergraduate pilot training, got our wings, went on to Arizona to Luke Air Force Base, which was home of the starfighter at the time, the German starfighter training.
Rolf, what did you make of your first flight in that Piaggio then? Did you enjoy it? Do you remember it?
I remember it vividly. It was a very old lieutenant, flight lieutenant, one of these specialist officers that were sergeants before. And he was a real nice guy, just, I think, about to retire. And he just took me around the field and we did a few turns and pitch up and whatever, just whatever you do to impress a young student. And he was smiling at me and saying, hey, we even get paid for this, look how much fun I'm having. And this has really impressed me all my life. So it was great fun. And it stayed that way.
Yeah. Did you when you did your aerobatics, how did you take to that? Did you get any air sickness?
Yeah, we did the first real aerobatics in the jet. Now the Piaggio is only capable of limited aerobatics like Chandel's Lazy 8 and stuff. But I once had an experience in the Cessna T-37 over in the States when I really put my barf back in the navigation component after spin exercises. We spun and spun, and it was a hot day, no pressurized cabin. And my pilot, Captain Heath, said, okay, don't worry about it, we'll get it finished. And We actually finished the lessons, did a few landings, and then got home. That was the only time.
Did you get the sense of, or the feeling of air sickness any time after that? I mean, did that experience cure any air sickness you might feel again, or did you feel nauseous at points again flying any other time?
Actually, fortunately, I never had air sickness since. I think partly because you're on the controls and you know exactly what's going on, right? I mean, if you're a passenger and somebody's jerking the plane around, you never know. But if you have that stick in the hand and you're about to shoot a loop or whatever, Immelmann split S, it doesn't matter. Or if you're in a gun attack or being attacked by someone else, yes, you do violent maneuvers, but you still do it yourself and you know what's going on. You know, you have that instant stick relationship and the sensory feeling that what's going on is the reaction of what you are doing. And I think that's why you never get airsick once you're in control.
Mm-hmm. So I think. Said that, yeah, I suppose it's about sort of your brain knowing or expecting, as you said, what's going to happen, isn't it? I suppose if you're putting the control inputs in place, then
right. If you're in control, yeah, that's it.
I think there's probably a psychological element to it. I mean, I occasionally get to jump in the back of various aeroplanes, and I think if I spend time thinking about whether or not I'm going to feel sick, I probably will end up feeling sick. But if I'm focused on doing something else and I'm distracted from that, then I don't end up getting air sickness. So
I get it. Yeah, of course.
Rolf, tell me about the pace of learning and change and development through that first 13 months then. So you started off by flying in Germany this sort of limited aerobatic aeroplane that flies very slowly. You then go to the T-37, which has, I think, the highest G onset rate of any aircraft in the US Air Force inventory, but is not that fast. And then you go to the T-38, which is fast, supersonic. For you as a student, people talk a lot about in the training pipeline, drinking from the fire hose, and just, you know, every day is a challenge to keep up, and you learn something one day and the next day you're expected to learn something new. Did you feel that? Were you able to go through the training pipeline up until the F-104 fairly easily? Did you struggle? What was the experience like?
I thought I was a pretty average student. I had to work hard. I realized there were phases that, you know, came easy, like aerobatics and others that, you know, the beginning of formation flying was probably more of a challenge. And so step by step, we were taking from one week to the next, every time new subject. As you said, you know, what was good on Monday was probably not good enough on Tuesday. So it was a very, very tight program, and I've seen people leave the course within 3 days and sent home to Germany. I mean, we were all screened, we were all trained in propeller aircraft, and we were highly motivated, but still half of us had to leave. And so I was, of course, I kept a diary. Every day I was writing down, okay, this was not so good, and hey, I had to do this right again. There was kind of a few instances when one time, due to a miscalculated final approach speed, I was, you know, I had to do the whole ride again. And of course, if you do that twice, you're halfway back in Germany. So they didn't fool around. You know, they were fair, but you know, there were strict rules, and you couldn't do more than 2 unsatisfactories in a week or so. And so I don't exactly remember how it was, but yes, constant progress. And on computer sheets, every day your performance was being assessed. So, and that was fed into one of these early 70s computers, you know, had to fill the entire A4 page with little tick marks in pencil, and then feed it into the machine, and it came out with a big chunk of computer sheets with your performance on it. So even then, I felt heavily under control and pressure. But every Friday, you know, we were going to the bar, you know, hanging loose and meeting some girls, you know, relaxing and not thinking about it. So we had a fresh start on Monday. Our squadron commanders were good to us, you know, they were understanding that we were, you know, fighting heavily to stay in the program. So it was give and take, I would say.
What was the split between German, or was it Luftwaffe or Kriegsmarine instructor pilots and American instructor pilots? What was the balance, the ratios?
We had, well, the majority obviously was German Air Force, because they had more pilots in general. And our Navy only had 2 jet wings total, 4 squadrons. That's nothing, compared to other countries. So, and they were very close together. So we had a bunch of Navy pilots. I was maybe one of 2 pilots in the entire class. And I think in my class there were only 2 Navy guys. The rest was Air Force, but it didn't really matter, because, we were all the same age, the same program. And the instructors, they came from the United States Air Force, not from their Navy, but the Air Force, from all different planes, from tankers, fighters, training planes. And of course, we had our German staff pilots. We had a German lieutenant colonel and a few admin pilots and regular instructor pilots from Germany. And among them were, I think it was 1 or 2 Navy guys. One was he was sort of a supervisor for the Navy guys that did the program. So he was also reporting to the Admiral, saying, this guy's doing okay. We should watch this guy. He's not doing so well. And so our little Navy was separately monitoring our performance within the course.
Did you notice a difference in instructional technique, or any cultural differences in the way that the American and the German instructors operated with you, either in the cockpit or out of the cockpit?
Not very much, I must say. The Germans that were there were absolutely Americanized. They were living an American lifestyle. 3-4 years in the sunshine, big camper vans, big houses. Their wives loved it. The kids went to kindergarten. So some actually later settled in the United States. Yeah. So this lifestyle, was available to all of them, students and instructor pilots. But yes, of course, the personal background of an American Air Force officer was definitely different from any of our German pilots. And I would also say the culture, the working culture and some etiquette is different within both air forces. Say they have, the United States is a very strict hierarchy where you never fulfill the next job in the same squadron. Like if you upgrade to deputy or squadron commander, you have to leave, you have to go somewhere else. And it's all, it's fair, but it's also very strict and tough. Whereas in Germany, everybody knows everybody, so it's this little Air Force, comparatively small size, and even the Navy, everybody was, on first name basis. So that was different.
You mentioned sort of the living the American lifestyle.
Yeah.
And in your book, you do talk a lot about nurses.
Can't help it.
And the occasional female air traffic controller. But was that a lot different from West German? I mean, would a 21-year-old, 22-year-old West German guy, were they that different to, let's say, a similar age sort of American?
Well, to us, it was all like a big toy store and big Disneyland. When we came over, the sun was shining, everything was different, everything was Texas-sized, very big, big cars, everything, good fun. Yeah, we were just young kids, all fascinated. And I think that really contributed to the fact that we had a lot of fun. And I think, sure, same age guy in Germany would have similar fun. But if you get a chance to spend 1 or 2 years under such circumstances, in such a great environment, great housing, great pay. We were treated like kings in Texas. They were showing us everything in their state. They were treating us to cattle branding sessions and, and steak grill, whatever. take us to the lakes, go sailing. I mean, this was couldn't be any better. And so we came back full of impressions, and I think it was the best that could happen to us at that age.
Tell me a little bit about the F-104G then. So this is the starfighter for West Germany. How is that different from other starfighters?
Okay, well, it all began with the 1954 F-104A, which was designed to be a high-altitude interceptor, which is a totally different rule. First flight, February 1954. And this is obviously a competitor with the MiG-21. So Germany was in the dilemma of having to choose the successor of the F-84 Thunderstreak, which they had at the time. So which was kind of an iron, slow speed, plane, very forgiving. And they only had a few options. They had the Mirage and the Grumman Tiger. So under political pressure, of course, having to decide within a pretty short time what aircraft to select for the two services, the Navy and the German Air Force. So they tested it, World War II pilots, Kropinski, and so they went ahead and tested the plane and said, yes, Starfighter is very good. However, turning capabilities, and let's think of all the weapons that we need to add. So it's not ready yet. So they had a lot of structural changes to be made. And excuse me, in the end, evolved a totally new plane, higher weight, different structure, different radar, different ejection seat, a lot more weight. So to be able to carry all these conventional weapons that we already had. So we are talking about, high drag, low drag bombs, unguided and guided rockets, and eventually the Cormoran missile. So yes, the F-104G was purpose built for the European theater. And it was like 140,000 people working on the program. It was the first big industrial program before Airbus and Tornado, actually. So this really brought back together a lot of Allied and pre-war German industry plants. It was very fascinating, actually, what was going on there. Messerschmitt, the whole 9 yards, everybody was there.
Were you looking at the F-104 then? So as you went through the training pipeline, did you know this history about it? Did you know anything about the G model? Were you sort of just heads down getting on with what you had to do that day, or were you looking ahead at what you were going to fly and aware of it?
Well, when you enter a training program like a conversion to any plane, military or civil, you just take it as it is. I knew the background. Yes, I heard all the rumors about Widowmakers, which was an issue 10 years before I joined. So in the 60s, when those problems had been solved in 1966. And so I came in 1978 onto the Starfighter, and at that time was a perfectly normal fast jet. So we were looking at it as like a plane that we had to master within a couple of months. And we were starting day one with a walk around and ended up with a graduation party. And we never thought really about the past with the heavy accident rate and all the previous problems that had been there, because obviously afterwards, when I flew operational Starfighters, even then they had a few more modifications done, which were very safety related and some good things for us. But yeah,
can we explore that a little before we talk about then your procession through the F-104 conversion course? You mentioned the Widowmaker, the reputation from times previous. How would you describe what had happened to get the aeroplane that reputation and that particular name?
Well, today it's pretty much obvious. The Germans introduced the starfighter in a very, very short time, in a limited time. And neither the bases nor the pilots nor the mechanics were actually ready. So the bases, the planes were standing out in the cold and rain. There were no protective shelters then. There was still a different maintenance system with squadron maintenance. Now we had a centralized system, which was introduced in the early 60s. We had a poor system management, poor parts management. They were dealing with everyday errors. You know, today it was a navigation problem, next day it's an engine problem, and they were trying to cope with this. The pilots came from subsonic, forgiving, low-speed planes, and they were not aware that the aerodynamic capabilities were totally different in the starfighter. You know, take anything from speed to angle of attack and sink rate, especially, a very, very bad killer. And so I would say material management, organizational errors, also technical problems. The early nozzle, the afterburner nozzle tended to swing open on takeoff, killing a few people. Then the first ejection seat was firing downwards, not upwards. Imagine, you know, in low-level flight. The successor, the C2, Lockheed C2 ejection seat, would fire upside the correct way up, but there were a couple of instances of the seat hitting the pilot after ejection, killing him. So the proper seat-man separation never really took place. Then various problems. The engine was always good. I mean, the J79 from the beginning was a very reliable engine, but the accessories like the auto pitch control system, as I said, the big issue was definitely the nozzle, and I would say this pretty much wraps it up. So mechanical problems, training problems, organizational errors, and it all accumulated in the mid-60s to a point where almost every day a star would fall out of the sky. And Steinhoff, you know, the guy's badly bruised general from World War II, he said in the end of 1966, this is it, you know, we must stop flying for a limited period of time, put all planes on the ground and evaluate the situation. And he came up with the proper procedures. And ever since, everything was good.
So that nozzle swinging open, then presumably that means a loss of thrust. So if the nozzle swings open, the pressure inside the chamber is lowered, and
exactly.
And so I think you referenced. So you've referenced the auto pitch control, and maybe you'll just explain to us in a minute what those things are, and perhaps have a deeper discussion around sync rates and those sorts of things. But you talked about there being a T handle in the cockpit that you could pull to lock the exhaust petals, the nozzle. Was that for that particular problem? So if it started to swing open, you could pull that and lock it?
Yes, it is. Actually, it was an emergency T handle on the left-hand side, not far from, you know, from the windscreen. And you had to do real quick reaction pulling of this T handle in order to close the nozzle to a mechanical 50% or whatever area. So to give it that thrust that you'd actually jump over the fence and head for clear skies. Because if you didn't react in time, if you were confused or looking what was going on, it was too late. And we have lost guys due to that. And another issue, the auto pitch control, that is a system which is working with the AOA probe, with the angle of attack probe on the outside of the plane that every plane has. If you exceed a certain angle of attack, then first a shaker will shake the control stick, and then finally a kicker would come in and physically push the stick forward to reduce the angle of attack. And now, if this happens at low level, it could happen that it kicks you into the ground. So there's an auto pitch control cutout switch, APC cutout, which may help you in such a situation.
You would have come then from the to the F-104 from the T-38, and the T-38 is notorious as well in the pattern, isn't it? For, you know, if you mishandle the aeroplane in the pattern, there's a good chance you're going to put yourself into a situation you can't recover from. So did the T-38 act as a good lead-in trainer for the F-104 then? I mean, did the risks and the the possibility of things going wrong dramatically increase when you went to the T-38 and then the F-104, say, compared to the T-37?
Well, I think the T-37 was just to learn the trade, and the T-38 was a very good lead-in fighter because of the high wing load and the unstable flight characteristics to begin with. You know, learning to fly formation, you know, be smooth on the controls, be careful in the pattern because of the high wing load and comparatively high speeds. Whereas the Starfighter from the very beginning felt a lot more stable. It felt a bit heavier to fly. So even though it had great roll rates, it didn't have, you know, the lightness on the stick when you turn. But I think, yes, it was an excellent plane for training for the Starfighter, and it felt right. You know, the first two takeoffs after the T-37, you know, were not alarming. You know what was going on. A bit more speed, a bit more thrust, but then, yeah, I thought it was good.
Okay, so when you get to the F-104, you get to Luke. So you go from Shepard to Luke. What do you? What are the emotional responses you have when you're looking at the F-104 on the ground for the first time and thinking about the fact you're going to go and fly that, and at some point you'll be solo in it?
Yes, well, the first day was a show by an older major, Mike Vivian, who showed us around like a precious object, and he was looking at it like a marvel, you know. And we said, you know, we're going to fly this beast, and it was there standing shiny in the desert sun, basically. So it was very impressive for us. And of course, with the sleek wings and no external stores, highly polished, you know, nicely polished metal, no paint on it, just US Air Force and some numbers and so on. It was a beautiful sight. Actually, I was very, very fascinated.
Were you intimidated by it?
Maybe, yeah. Kind of, yeah. It was a single-seat fighter. Never flown a single-seater before. Only two-seaters or four-seaters, and said, okay, wow, this is something, you know. But it was the whole point of being there. You know, we were supposed to fly the F-104. Some of us actually got different planes. So the ones that were selected for the F-104 had remained or had gone to Luke Air Force Base. Others went to George Air Force Base, to Shaw Air Force Base, or back to Germany for G91 subsonic planes. And so we were the lucky ones that ended up with a Starfighter.
Was there therefore a pecking order in terms of bragging rights and kudos? Was it just luck that you ended up, because you were going to go and fly in a Marine Flieger, you were the German Navy squadron? Was it sort of luck that you ended up at the top of the pile, so to speak, or was that because you were a better applicant, a better candidate for it?
Well, they had a point system where, you know, like the top percent of the class got the F-104, or could decide, you know, some Air Force had the options of going F4 or other planes, but, you know, the ones who had wanted to fly the F-104 in the first place, yes, they had to be good, and they had to end up in the first, 25% of the class. Me as a Navy guy, I had to meet the same requirements, but then had I failed the program, there wouldn't have been a suitable plane for me, because that was the only jet we had. So yes, I was once I passed the program, I was automatically in the class, so that was good for me.
Did you get winged at the end of T-38s then? Or had you actually formally received your wings by this time?
Yeah, we had some German wings after 6 months in the T-37 and some basic flight pay. And then the United States gave us their metal wings, standard pilot wings. They have standard command and senior and command pilot. We got those right after the T-38, so which is about 13 months after we started the program in the United States. So we came back. Yes.
Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
So when we left for Arizona, we already proud 2 wings on our jackets, the German and the United States Air Force one.
So the question I was going to ask was whether or not you felt like a fighter pilot. There are, those who talk about being fighter pilots as being a state of mind and a set of characteristics and behaviors and mentalities, rather than just, you can be somebody who flies fighters or you could be a fighter pilot. Were you beginning to become a fighter pilot? Did you feel like a fighter pilot at that point?
Slowly, yes. We were apprentice fighter pilots, and we from every day we were learning some new trade, but we didn't actually fire any weapons until we ended up in Luke. So we had been flying unarmed T-38s and T-37s up to then, doing some formation exercise, doing some basic fighter maneuvering, yes, but because there was nothing close to what we had later on the firing range. And so it was only at Luke Air Force Base when I slowly began to understand I was going to be a fighter pilot, So firing a weapon is different from flying training planes. And that's how I felt, It did something to me. I thought, okay, this is it, it's not a toy store anymore. We actually go into the gunnery range, and that's where we went.
Can you describe the F-104G then as a weapon system? You talked about it having a different radar from the early F-104A. What radar did you have? How capable was it? What could you do with it? How capable was the aeroplane as a weapon system?
Well, first off, I think the Starfighter was a very stable weapons platform due to its high wing load. So it was actually, once it was in the air and beyond 300 knots, you were looking at a very, very stable platform, not shaking around, no vibrations, no oscillations. But from looking at the radar, yes, we did use it for ground mapping. It was called the NASA radar, which was a model developed in the 50s. And for that time, a very advanced ground mapping / air-to-air radar, which had an air-to-air mode for gunnery and missile attacks. So where you had a range circle and on this, depicted on this combining glass, the forerunner of the head-up display. And it was a pretty good tool, I would say. You had to take various things into account, wind correction, the computing side. It was not a wind computing side for attacks, so you had to always do your own maths and figure out where the wind was coming from, how much, had to aim into the wind. And this took a lot of practice, but we did radar runs over the desert of Arizona, where we actually did our own map predictions, shading with pencil and paper, trying to figure out what this hill in the desert would end up showing on the radar scope. And this is how you actually learn the trade. So it was a monochrome radar with state-of-the-art round little display. And we got introduction to air-to-air radar in various modes. So this is pretty much what everybody had at the time. There's nobody better equipped than us, neither on the eastern side, neither in the western inventory. So I think that was pretty much it.
So you were on par from a radar point of view then with the F4, the radar. APQ 120 is the designation it ended up being. I can't remember what it was originally for the F4, but would you say then that your ability in the air-to-air arena was therefore had parity with the F4 in that respect?
Well, I wouldn't be able to tell because I never flew the F4. I spoke to the guys, and of course they were two-man cockpit, one focusing on this and the other guy focusing on that. This was already an advantage, so to speak. But our primary role was fighter bomber, so we were mostly dealing with ground mapping, and we were not actually watching the skies for some guys intruding, and then trying to lock onto him with a radar. This was a secondary role, and this is something that we all did for practice and for training. But I would say 80% of our job later on was done low-level flying over the sea, looking for possible hostile surface and aircraft. So this was what we were equipped for in the first place.
We'll get into that in a minute then. So when we talk about you going back to Germany, and of course there's the thing that people always talk about, having gone and trained in Arizona, is getting back to the weather of Western Europe. So you'll talk about that, I'm sure. But what about the strike training missions that you were flying then, and the thing we talked about earlier around some guys getting bad scores and throwing in the towel? Was that a surprise that people just said, well, it's not for me? Could you see that building up and people becoming less and less comfortable with the flying and their achievements in the training pipeline? Or did people literally seem okay, and then the next day they would say, I'm done?
Yes, this also happened, but I would say generally most of us did fairly well in the weapons training. You start off typically with low level work at 100 feet, bombing level bombs, then doing some angular work, 10 degrees, 20 degrees, do some strafing and so on and so on. So this takes a lot of practice, everybody knows, and you need a lot of runs. We had at least, I think it was 24 missions in our program, just air-to-ground gunnery and bombing. So any fighter pilot will know that it takes a certain time to get used to it. I mean, to actually find this perfect spot in space and time where you can release that weapon without having G's on the aircraft, without aiming to the wrong direction, and so on, having the plane on speed. Even though it may look right, it could be totally wrong because you have G's on the plane or you're not considering the wind. But yeah, some people were probably not designed to be a fighter pilot because of that, because they had problems physically handling the plane on a firing range. It means within the given time frame, with our short time frame and the tight program that we had, actually mastering this pattern work with 4 aircraft in the pattern, chasing around, not trying to lose each other, rolling in the correct bank, the correct dive angle. And then at the end of the day, if you still haven't got it, the next day and the day after, people may say, no, it's not your cup of tea, go back to transport planes. And if you had a chance, you were allowed to actually cross-transfer to maybe a transport, but this was not the rule. Most people was put back to the to a weapon system operator seat, so rear seat.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, they were offered. Many of our guys, I had 3 guys flunking the class. They were all happy backseaters afterwards, doing a fine job. So they went to the F4, and nobody complained. Good pay, good fun. Everything was fine, except that they weren't pilots. So
they had pilots' wings, but they went and became Wizzos.
Yeah, in some instances they were washed out at the point where we already had their wings, and some were washed out earlier. So they were, asked, what would you like to do? Said, okay, your score so far not bad. Why not train you as a navigator? And they ended up with a navigator, but it didn't mean much different because the longest part of the career was still ahead of them. So they had a bit of pilot training, which didn't hurt, and then went all the way through their navigator training in Pensacola and George Air Force Base, and you name it.
It's a good way of staying in the US for another couple of years.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They loved it. Yeah.
At this point then, Rolf, when you're flying around the circuit and you're thinking about controlling all these variables in order to get this impossible task of getting some rounds on target with just this lead computing optical sight, what were you like as an aviator? Were you able to fly the F-104 without really thinking about it and therefore focus on the task of shooting something or dropping a bomb on something or a simulated bomb on something? Or were you still having to spend quite a lot of time thinking about flying the airplane?
Well, quite honestly, some people say it takes 1,000 hours to become part of the airplane. It's just strap it on or strap onto the plane and forget that it's actually an airplane. It's a gun, flying gun. It took me a long time to actually not forget, but not to think so much about the surroundings, the limits and the aerodynamic limitations that the plane is, which always have to be taken into consideration, because once you're in an attack, you immediately have problems with G loads and angle of attack limitations and so on. So you can really, except maybe for modern Typhoon jets or so, where you actually don't have to think about it. But in those days, of course, if you overjeet the plane or if you forgot about the speed, that was it. So I think most of us were fully aware, they had to try and do both, fly the plane and use it as a weapon and focus on both and not forget any switches, not forget any limitations, don't exceed anything, do this, do that. So it's quite challenging.
From a systems point of view, was it a complicated airplane?
I would say there was a fair amount of switches to be done before you could actually do anything. The master arming switches, the camera switches, the pre-bomb selection, the timing selections for the nuclear weapons set, and so on and so on. But on the other hand, those were mostly mechanical devices, and you had right in front of you, if you pushed the right buttons and had a certain sequence going, you were likely to actually release a bomb or fire a gun. But I haven't flown any fast modern jets. I've been out of the armed forces for too long. I wouldn't be able to tell what it is like to be flying an F-16 or a Typhoon jet in comparison, with all the track down, shoot down capability and all the various things you have to consider on the the HOTA stick and so on, things we never had. So we thought it was a lot, but maybe from today's pilot point of view, it was ridiculous.
Thanks for tuning in to 10% True. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Feel free to subscribe, and if you're on YouTube, hit the bell button to make sure you get notified of the next episode. Thanks and take care.